and welcome to another edition of Interludes with Chris Mackenzie. And today it is my great good fortune to have in the studio with me Alan Hopgood, well-known, famous, didn't I say, actor and playwright.
Hello, Christine.
Tell me, how did you get into this game, as they call it?
How did I? My God, it's a long time ago. Well, my first role was on stage when I was age 6.
Oh, really?
Over in Hobart, yes. My sisters were quite good pianists, and they were in an ABC review, and I was dispatched by my mother to babysit them. I don't know what I was supposed to do, but anyway, I was spotted by the local comedian. He needed a sort of fall guy for a comedy sketch, so I finished up on stage doing what I can't remember now. But subsequently, being Hobart, it wasn't that easy to bring young fellas from the mainland. So whenever they needed a page or something, they picked on me because they knew I wouldn't get the wobblies or pee in the corner or something like that. So between the age of 6 and 11, I did about 7 plays, mostly with touring companies that came over. Peter O'Shaughnessy, for example, and Othello scared hell out of me, Anyway, then when I was 15, I did Ronnie and the Winslow Boy. And that was a fairly major turning point for me because it was a very good production, and it actually turned my head a little bit towards the theatre. Subsequently, my family came to the mainland, and I finished up at Queen's College at the Melbourne University. Mm-hmm. And, of course, they have an annual college play. Uh-huh. Plus, there's huge activities back in those days, particularly with Melbourne the University Drama Society, etc. Mm-hmm. And I was in a play called Adam the Creator by the Chapek Brothers, which was directed by Hannah Pravda. Uh-huh. And she said it was a huge role, and she actually asked if the college would import a professional actor, which they couldn't afford, of course. So she said, well, the only way I can do it is if Alan becomes a puppet. I'll give him a crash course in acting, which he did. And subsequently, I was really quite good in the role. And later in that year, she was to direct Of Mice and Men for the then Union Theatre Repertory Company, which, of course, is now the Melbourne Theatre Company. And she didn't have anybody to play George. She had Noel Ferrier to play Lenny. Mm-hmm. The only actor in the company that, and I won't say his name, that could have played George was pretty openly homosexual, so that would have destroyed the relationship between the two. So she said, look, I've got this young fella up at Queen's College, so she dragged me in to play George. Unfortunately, I didn't know anything about professional theatre because I had daggers all up and down my back. You can imagine how they felt.
Who is this man?
They're coming in to make this role. Well, I survived that. And subsequently, I was doing my degree, of course, and in the long vacation, which is when the Union Theatre Repertory Company had access to the Union Theatre when the students weren't using it, I played roles with them while I was completing my degree. And I played under Walt Cherry, and that was, climaxed, you might say, with the first production of an Australian musical, which was Lola Montez. Ah. And I played a role in that. And then they decided that should tour commercially. So they asked me to reproduce that role. But they gave me the added lure, you might say, of playing opposite Ray Barrett in Look Back in Anger up in Sydney. That was too much of a temptation. So,
oh, yes, you couldn't turn your back on that, could
no.
you? No.
At that stage, of course, I was bonded to the education department. So I had done 1 year of my teaching. Which I was obliged to do to pay off my bond. So I ditched that and went into professional theatre full time. Then I realised that I could never pay my bond back as an actor. Ever. So I subsequently went back to teaching, completed my bond, and then I went back into full-time theatre. But the important thing about that period I've described is that it was absolute wall-to-wall carpet theatre in my life at the university.
How marvellous.
Because it was college plays, it was Melbourne University plays, reviews, acting with people like Barry Humphries in his formative days, watching him with his Dada exhibitions and all that. And of course, with the company acting with the greats, the Fred Parslows and people like that.
Oh my goodness!
So that it was inevitable that I should try my hand at writing a play.
Of course. Are we going to play some? Don't you want to play some music from Lola Montez?
Well, if you could bear listening to me, I actually
I'd love to.
was on this. I was recorded for this, and
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think.
it's been played on and off for years, and I haven't seen a cent in royalties. When are you going to pay me? This is my one and only solo from Lola Montez.
Okay.
Each year I think, but I didn't make it this time. There's always another summer, another chance. Every year there comes that first hot day when I down my tools and drift away, and I won't go back to earn my pay till the summer's been and gone. And I come out where the world is wide, and the blue sky makes you clean inside, and the sun soaks in and tans your hide, till summer's been and gone. 'Cause a man forgets his city life, and a man forgets his curse, but I also miss my pretty wife, and my 5 little steps and stairs. So when winter comes I won't much mind, I can go and face the daily grind, but for now I've left a lot behind, till the summer's been and gone. 'Cause a man forgets his city life, and a man forgets his curse, but I also miss my pretty wife, and my 5 little steps and stairs. So when winter comes I won't much mind, I can go and face the daily grind, but for now I've left a lot behind, till the summer's been and gone.
I can't believe that's the only recording you've ever made of any. Is it?
Yep.
You could be top of the pops.
I
You know.
didn't make it as a Kamal or anything. No, it was nice to have done, I must admit.
No, I think that's lovely. I'm delighted
Thank
to
you.
have heard it. So, okay, Lola Montez is over, and you're heading off into doing.
Well, I went back to teaching, as I
Yes.
said, and it was whilst I was teaching I wrote my very first play called Marcus, which was done at the Melbourne University by the Marlowe Society, directed by George Ogilvy. It was his very first production. And I was very fortunate because it was a typical first play, 70 in the cast. And a life cycle, poetic allegory, all these things you've got to get out of your system. But mercifully, the downtown critics didn't kill me. They just said, when he gets to write about real people, it might be okay. But anyway, I mean, I dipped my toe in the water, you see what I mean? And I was doing odd things at the ABC and plays, etc. And dear Oscar Whitbread said to me one day, he said, look, somebody should write a play about football. And I said, oh, yes, of course. And I just stuck that in the back of my brain. Well, anyway, I was with the Melbourne Theatre Company, and I was in a show called The Fantastics.
Ah, yes.
Now, this proved to be an absolutely important show for me because prior to this, I'd been in a downtime because when I'd gone back to teaching, then left that, the only work I could get was to go into a review up in Sydney called Stop Press at the Phillip Street Theatre. Now, I say that was a downtime because what had happened, they'd shifted theatres from the old review house, to a new one and spent all their money.
Uh-oh.
So when they put the show on that I was in, it was a disaster. But they couldn't take it off because they didn't have any money to put another one on. So I was literally stuck in this show with Mary Hardy and Judy Farr, top actors like that, all of whom wanted to get out, but they wouldn't let us out. So for 6 months, I was stuck in this show up in Sydney. When that finished, I was taken down to GTV9 as Graham Kennedy's personal scriptwriter.
Oh, really?
And I absolutely genuflect to Graham's skill, but he and I didn't get on.
Yeah.
So that my first gag for him, to be quite honest, he didn't understand. And the director said, "Do it, Graham, do it." So he did it, and it got a round of applause. And that was the finish of me. So for 6 months I sat in my little cubicle writing one-liners which were never said.
Oh, really?
So when I left that, my stocks were really low. And I was told that they were auditioning for this show, The Fantastics, and my ego was so deflated that I actually went in the foyer of the Russell Street Theatre and thinking, well, what's the point? So I turned to leave, to go out into Russell Street, and the voice said, "Hoppy, you here, are you?" I said, oh, yeah. "You're on next." So I went on. The rest is history. I got the role. Must admit, I was very good on the role. In fact,
And you enjoyed it, I
That's when my wife saw me for the first time. She saw the show 8 times.
Yeah.
And I was this magnificent Spaniard, and these high-heeled Louis and all that sort of thing. She met me backstage and said, "Oh, he's not really big after all, is he?" Anyway, that was the turning point, because John Sumner, who actually hadn't used me in the Union Theatre days, there was other directors used me, he didn't really think I could act. He told me that once. And then he saw me in The Fantastic, said, he can act, can't he? that was the turning point.
He was slow at making up his mind about that.
And my big number in that was, which one I think we've got here? Yes, Try to Remember.
Try to Remember. Let's hear it.
Try to remember the kind of September when life was slow and oh so mellow. Try to remember the kind of September when grass was green and grain was yellow. Try to remember the kind of September when you were a tender and callow fellow. Try to remember, and if you remember, then follow. Try to remember when life was so tender that no one wept except the willow. Try to remember when life was so tender that dreams were kept beside your pillow. Try to remember when life was so tender that love was an ember about to billow. Try to remember, and if you remember, then follow. December, it's nice to remember, although you know the snow will follow. Deep in December, it's nice to remember, without a hurt, the heart is hollow. Deep in December, it's nice to remember the fire of September that made us mellow. Deep in December, our hearts should remember and follow.
A lovely tune. I like to think that's you singing, but I believe we have to come clean on that.
Got to be honest, that was Jerry Orbach. Yeah. I was okay, but I wasn't that good. It was a beautiful show.
Was it?
Oh, it was a lovely show.
Absolutely lovely. Why don't they ever bring these wonderful things back again?
Ah, yes, I know. John Finniston, who was in that.
Yes.
We tried to bring it back a few years ago, and money, that's what it is, money, you know.
Oh.
Anyway, the important thing for me was, as I say, John Sumner decided, well, I could act, and then cast me in the Man Who Came to Dinner, opposite Francis Xavier Thring.
One.
And, I mean, I've survived many things in my time, but I did well to survive that season with Frank Thring. Because I was Banjo, which was the sort of Groucho Marx character who comes on in Act 3. And on a Friday, that meant we did 2 shows, 5 o'clock and 8:30, and that meant I danced with Frank in Act 3 and Act 6. By Act 6, regularly things started to happen. He'd either miss me or I'd get a knee in a very private place or something. Because we were all scared of him then. I mean, he was fresh from El Cid, you know, with a rose between his teeth. And, and living up to his reputation as being, you know, the grand Frank Thring, of course. So, in fear and trepidation, I went up to him and said, Mr. Thring, could you tell me what happens in Act 6 on a Friday night? And he said, oh, darling, if I want to get to sleep by 4, I've got to take my Nembutal at 10. It's no wonder he got on stage at all. Anyway, needless to say, that was a huge success. So much so that John Sumner thought, oh, good, I can take my annual holiday. So he went off to the Northern Territory to chase bulls, which is what he liked to do.
Really?
And whilst he was away, the business dropped out of the show. And in those days, there were no subscriber bases. You know, each show went on if it lived or died according to the box office. You know, he came back and he had absolutely nothing to put on. And he took me for a cup of coffee and he said, "You write plays, don't you, boy?" He'd heard about Marcus, you see, the 70-hander. And I said, "Oh yes." And he said, "Have you got anything?" And I said, yes, I do, John, but you won't like it because you're an Englishman. It's about Australian rules football. He said, no, you never know. Tell me, what's it about? So I said, well, it's about this fellow who can kick bags of wheat with his bare feet. And I could see the cash register go clunk, 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 clunk. He said, when can I see it? I said, a week? I hadn't written it. I had not written it. So I used to go home from my tango with Mr. Thring and write till 3 or 4 in the morning. He had his play in a week. I rang up to see what he thought of it. He said, it's being typed now, boy. We go into rehearsal next week. 4 weeks later, it was on stage.
That was Let the Big Men Fly?
And The Big Men Fly, back in 1963. People say, what was it like writing it? I say, I have absolutely no idea. I was just in a sort of trance.
Oh, I would think so, yes, absolutely.
And of course, I mean, back in those days, now we've had Williamson's The Club and several footy plays, but back then it was not the done thing, you know, for the Union Theatre Repertory Company to do a play about football. So there was no advance booking. So we opened opening night. We didn't know whether the thing would last 24 hours or not. History will tell you it was a huge success. Next morning they sold 2,000 tickets by lunchtime. At the end of that week it was difficult to get a seat, and we ran 12 weeks to capacity business.
Isn't that marvellous?
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Oh, wonderful. We're going to have to wind up a little bit now because we're going to run out of time. But Alan, will you come will you come back and tell me a bit more?
With pleasure, Christine.
I think that would be great fun. I know that our listeners would just love to hear it. So for the meantime, we'll just say goodbye and we'll meet again soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye. You've been listening to Interludes with Chris Mackenzie.